To it, he popped into the Newscast studio so he could tell me a little bit more about the conference and how his relatively new leadership is shaping up. And Zack is here now. Hello, Zack.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back on Newscast. I mean, you've had a busy day today, so it's the kind of the pre-conference choreography that all party leaders go through. Just run through all the things you've done already.
So I did the regional round this morning, which I believe is affectionately called the Liz Truss round, because it's existed long before her.
All the local radio stations, yeah.
Exactly, and she had that nightmare. So I did wonder how it was going to go, but actually I really enjoyed it. It's genuinely fascinating hearing all the different presenters from all the different regions around the country that have very similar questions in some ways about the big issues. And then there's always kind of a hyper-local issue that they want to know your opinion on. So I did that for radio. Then I did the same thing for TV, which I think is going out tonight. Then I went on Politics Live with Penny Mordaunt, who I have to say, I disagree with on everything politically possible. As a gay man, she's kind of iconic.
Yeah, she is quite cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Did you get on, you and Penny?
We really got on. We were on GMB a couple of weeks ago, Good Morning Britain, where we were discussing Donald Trump's visit. And in the green room, she was telling me stories about Churchill for a while, which I think she probably misjudged her audience.
Right.
But I also just enjoyed the fact that she's a human being that cares about tradition.
I mean, we're now talking about a different party, but did you get comeback vibes from her?
She said on Politics Live she's coming back. She said she's looking for an MP seat. The presenter then said, do you want to be leader? And she quickly batted that down. But I think she's probably looking at Annie Burnham and going, that's not the strategy to say that you want to be leader.
To keep your powder dry.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, in the middle of all that media, we got the news from Manchester about the events at the synagogue. What would your reaction to that be?
I mean, as a politician, sometimes you try and find new things to say. And I think there's nothing new to say here other than it's just utterly horrifying. I suppose the reflection I do have is I'm from Manchester. I'm Jewish. I went and attended a Jewish synagogue pretty near Heaton Park. I went to school very close to that area. So I think when you can associate a horrific attack with something that feels personal, it does hit a little bit harder. So I was just checking in with my mum and with my family just in terms of how they're feeling.
How are they?
Just really worried. My mum said that she has friends who go to that synagogue. She knows people who go to that synagogue. There's already a real fear in the air around rising anti-Semitism and rising hate crime. I suppose the only thing I would kind of move to, I guess, is some of the proudest work I have as a Jewish politician in my role as a London Assembly member is when I work with the Muslim community and the interfaith work. I'm recognizing that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are two sides of the same coin. And I think it's really important also as a gay man that minority communities stick together. We don't yet know the reasons for this attack, the motives for this attack. But even without knowing that, we know that anti-Semitism is on the rise in the same time that Islamophobia has been on the rise. And I think as politicians, it's really important that we look to civic decency, democracy, the work that Joe Cox did around having more in common than that divides us. And it just feels like a day for that kind of reflection.
I mean, as politicians from different parts of the political spectrum react to this, what would you say would be a bad way of reacting to it? And as you said, we don't know the details of what was behind this attack, but just in terms of handling it as a society.
I was disappointed in how Kemi Badenoch had reacted to it. She immediately pivoted to talking about the Middle East. The Middle East is something I deeply care about, and I don't want to do the same thing that Kemi Badenoch's just done whilst criticising her. I think it's really important to not conflate these issues and actually just recognise that this is about community cohesion. And of course, community cohesion is disrupted when there is conflict elsewhere in the world. But I think in the immediate aftermath of an attack, when you don't yet know what's going on, I think it's important to just focus on the victims, the survivors. And also, I think it's important to thank the emergency responders. Everyone thanks them for when they turn up, but actually there will be hours and hours now of work to do that those people are doing. And I was pleased to just hear the Prime Minister say in a statement that they're going to provide extra security and support for synagogues right across the country.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, there's already a certain level of security around most synagogues. Do you think that's going to have to go to the next level now?
I think potentially. I think, again, it's about understanding what this attack, how motivated it was in terms of, was this a group? Was this a lone killer? It's impossible to know that without knowing those conversations. I think more widely, though, we can't as a society just keep making ourselves more secure or just keep employing more weapons or people or literal walls. Of course, that's a kind of short-term measure, and I'm not knocking that. It's important that people physically feel safe. I think what's much more deep-rooted are those deep conversations about who are we as a society, who are we as a community. And I think a lot of the flag discourse that's happened recently, again, not relating it to this, we don't know what's happened here, but more widely, the kind of anger that there is in society, the toxicity, finding a place to go that's about having a much more informed, nuanced conversation. It's not a deep criticism of the Lib Dems, but to see Tim Farron wrapped up in a Union Jack.
Oh, I actually missed that. Oops.
You missed something on the news. I'm amazed.
Sorry.
And I can understand why he did it. So it's not, it's not an all-out attack, but I don't think it's going to cut it. I think challenging flag waving when it's used to intimidate people, not all flag waving is about that, but there's certainly been flag waving that I would say has been used to intimidate people. As a response to that, to wrap yourself in the flag and talk about patriotism, I don't think is the answer. I think we need a much more considered, long-form conversation about migration, about asylum, about the British flag, about empire, about colonialism. These are going to be complicated conversations.
I mean, how does that happen, though? Because, like, since year dot, politicians have said, oh, we need to have a big grown-up conversation about insert subject. But
Yes.
these days, how do you do that?
I think it happens through leadership. So far too often, what politicians mean by leadership when they talk about connecting or communicating with constituents, in the worst case scenarios, they go to a focus group and then they make the rules dependent on what they've been told at a focus group. In a better kind of scenario, they go out to communities and they tell people what their policies are. What I'm looking to do is something very different. It's not have a blank sheet of paper. I think that's what Ed Miliband said at one point, this kind of idea of blank canvas. And then we got the Ed Stone. I think that's the wrong way to do things. I think you've got to be very clear about your values. I think there are conversations that are going to be very difficult to have. I was actually just confronted with one of these on Politics Live. There was a worker in the oil refinery where there's lots of redundancies and we were talking about net zero. It just struck me that as a politician, my very first instinct, I think it was the right instinct, was to connect with the person on a human level, that people are losing their jobs. And politicians who just bang on about net zero without connecting with that first, I think are really missing the point.
And so what did you say to them?
I said to them that everything in me feels for the people who have lost their jobs and their families. And at the same time, and at the same time is a really important caveat here, we've got to get to net zero. We've got to tackle the climate crisis. I'm not doing any good to those workers to allow more wildfires, more floods, more destruction. Again, what needs to happen, though, is a politician needs to have those direct, difficult conversations and say, more than anything, I want to protect your livelihood. I want to make sure that this is co-designed and co-produced with you and the people most affected. This doesn't happen from burying our head in the sand and just saying either we need to get to net zero, sod the workers, or the workers are the most important thing here. We don't need to worry about the science of the climate crisis. We need to have those difficult, complex conversations, but ultimately make sure we're not talking down to people and actually politicians are in listening mode whilst maintaining values. And that's the tightrope. Maintain your values, but make sure you're listening and have those conversations.
And that's all well and good from a sort of like how the relationship between the voter and the politician and the person affected by a policy decision and the person making the policy. But what have you got to offer that person now?
To lower their bills. And that's the number one thing I want to do over the next few days in terms of the message I want people to take from the Green Party conference. Everyone knows, hopefully, that we want to tackle the climate crisis and we want to protect the environment, and that will always remain stable. What they don't know, though, is that I want to lower bills. I want to protect
all bills?
Yeah, literally all bills. So we could do things like bring the water companies back into public ownership. It is outrageous that they are pumping sewage into our water and charging us extra for the privilege. We have a government who say it would be too expensive, but we have shareholders who say these assets are worth nothing. So someone's not telling the full truth here, and my money is on the government. We can do that. We can insulate every single home in Britain that needs it. That would both keep homes warm in the winter, cool in the summer. It would bring down bills, back to that theme again. And it would create, back to the jobs theme, hundreds of thousands of new jobs in the green kind of sector that could be in trade unions, in the public sector. People are paid properly. They're treated with dignity and care at work. It just feels like there is a green vision to be had here, where far too often we've been stuck in the language of sacrifice and what needs to change that's going to be bad for people.
Eat less meat because
totally.
produce lots of carbon. Yeah. But in terms of insulating every home in Britain, very, very ambitious goal. I mean, how long would that take?
That's where you need to be in government, I think, truthfully, to go, what is the plan here? That's a deeply dissatisfying answer. I can hear that.
No, I know, it's fine. No, I understand.
But I think it can be done quicker than we think it can.
Yeah.
And where I take from that is the Marshall Plan, or also the setting up of the NHS. This was all done in response to the crisis of the Second World War. They said, we've got to change society, transform it, let's get on with it. And I think what's missing at the moment is a response to the inequality crisis. And what I mean by that is since the pandemic began, billionaire wealth in this country has doubled, but our public assets have absolutely been stripped away. We've got people sleeping out on the streets. We've got people using warm banks and food banks. It's absolutely outrageous and shameful. It's not enough just to finger point, but it is enough to go, we can't carry on like this, guys. We can't keep the status quo. We actually need to change everything. But in changing everything, we can make sure that working class communities, small business owners, the kind of 99% of people can be kept together with what they have more in common. And what we need to recognize is there are a very small group of people, multi-millionaires and billionaires, who are controlling our assets, who are controlling the narrative. And actually, we need to challenge them. And I don't necessarily mean in an aggressive way. Some of these people, like the patriotic millionaires, a group of millionaires who are saying, actually, we think we should pay more tax. That would be better for society. I think it's about really driving this conversation and saying we really need to look at a fair taxation system, how we invest in our economy, and crucially break down this awful metaphor that a household economy is anything like a national budget.
By
Those
which
two
you
things
mean
aren't true.
actually a government can borrow a lot more than, say, you or I could on our credit card or our mortgage, because the government is subject to different forces to us.
Yeah, I go even deeper than that. Who are we borrowing from? Who are we in debt to? Largely, it's to ourselves and to our own banks. And so, actually, of all people, Richard Tice has been talking about this, that we're paying money on commercial loans to banks that we actually don't need to be paying that money. So there's lots of places where I think we could.
Yeah, this is
relook
basically the interest that the Bank of England pays to commercial banks. Yeah.
Exactly that. And that's just one example, but I think there's quite
Do you find yourself surprised that you're agreeing with the reform policy?
I mean, horrendously.
Okay.
I feel like I need to, wash myself afterwards. But I think, the point here is, I despise most of Reform's politics. What I think they do really, really well, and is something I've been learning from, is connecting with people's fears and connecting with the things they care about every single day. Now, I think Reform's solutions are the politics of hate, despair, division, and I'm definitely not going to dabble in those at all. But if they can rocket through the polls by really cutting through, by talking about the things that matter to people in the economy, I see no reason why the Greens can't rocket through the polls with a politics of hope, community, and actual tangible difference to people's
I mean,
lives.
we started off this conversation talking about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and having better conversations about that stuff. Why is it then okay to say that there's a political party that you despise? Because that D word is a strong word.
Well, I think I said I despise their politics, so I was very careful about how I said it. I think it's about not despising human
Yeah, but you
beings.
still did use the word despise.
Because I think...
So that ups the ante, that turns up the temperature on the conversation.
Yeah, I might reflect this a little bit back on you, although I guess you're interviewing me, which is, I guess, in the media, if you say things that are quite bland or don't feel like they're kind of punchy or hitting, they're just not really heard. And that's partly, it's definitely not your fault personally. It's 24/7 media where politicians are constantly going, how can this message be heard? So I am really careful about my language. The other day, I went to Labour conference and everything in me said the language here, I realise I'm using it now, but hopefully to deconstruct it, is that I'm parking my tanks on the lawn of the Labour conference. And I just think that's inappropriate with the amount of conflict we have right now. But then there isn't an obvious metaphor that we have in our society for what does it look like. Even the whole language.
Yeah, so why did you go to the Labour conference then?
Because I wanted to speak to people who wanted the Tories out, absolutely don't want the politics of reform, and feel like their only choice is Keir Starmer. But this is a prime minister who has cut disability benefits, kept the two-child benefit cap at
Well, no, he
now.
reversed his plan to cut disability benefits.
Right, okay. I mean, still... still not good enough that was even on the table, that for lots of people in this country, they were deeply worried about that. And I would say is still enabling the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And so I know there's lots of people in the Labour Party who are deeply unsatisfied, deeply disillusioned. I also know that Keir Starmer, or whoever the future Labour leader's campaign will be, is it's me or it's Nigel Farage. And I want to deconstruct that narrative right now because it doesn't have to be that way. We're no longer in a two-party system. The Green Party at the last election got nearly 2 million votes. We've got 39 second-place finishes. We've got 80,000 members now. The reason why that's significant is that's a 33% increase in the entire membership since I announced I was running for leader. We've also had 21 defections this year alone, 10 of them last month. So there's a very clear trajectory for the Green Party right now. That's not just about disaffected Labour voters. It's also about disaffected Tory voters. even reform voters and people who haven't voted yet. But I think there's a very clear narrative between now and May, when we have huge elections, where we're hoping to win the mayor of Hackney, we're hoping to win seats right across Manchester and the north of England. A lot of these votes will come from previous Labour voters. So I just wanted to go to exactly where they were, speak to people on the street. I vox popped. I love a good vox pop. And actually, learned it from you guys. But what I saw time and time again is actually people who were legitimately angry and frustrated and saying that Keir Starmer got through on one word, which was change. But what change has he really offered? And even where there has been change, has it really been changed for the better? And so I think this is a moment for an alternative. I'm not surprised that more people than ever before are going to join.greenparty.org.uk. Sorry, that was cheeky.
No, you've got to get the plugs in. You talked about defections. That's at a local level. Can you imagine a world where a Labour MP defects to the Greens?
I can't imagine a world where it doesn't happen, actually. I think it's probably coming closer and closer. I really legitimately...
Are you talking to people?
I'm talking to people all the time, and I legitimately don't have an answer right now. Otherwise, I think I'd be tempted to kind of hint at it. There's no Labour MP right now that's saying to me, I'm going to defect. There are lots of Labour MPs who I'm regularly talking to who are so deeply unhappy and can't see a route anymore in the Labour Party. Someone who said this kind of thing publicly, so I will be indiscreet and talk about them, is Clive Lewis. He says that right now he feels like he needs to stay within the Labour Party and fight within the Labour Party. He is not shy about his criticism of the Prime Minister. He's not shy about his criticism of the entire programme of the Labour government. So Clive's a friend. He's someone I have a lot of respect for. But I also think there's a point where it doesn't make coherent sense anymore to be so unhappy with a party and so unhappy with the government, but to say I'm still going to stick here. Because actually what I see is the Prime Minister uses those people as a shield. He talks to the left of the country and he goes, oh, look, it's not all that bad. I've got Clive Lewis and Nadia Whittome and I've got Richard Burgon. It's all going to be fine because these people are here. And I do think all of those MPs who I have time for, at some point, when is enough enough? And it's not for me to decide that. That's up for them to decide it. All I'd say, my door's very open.
I was going to say you extended an open hand, but you went for the door.
Yeah, I've got a boring caveat, which is it's not my decision. It's an elected bodies within the Green Party because we're very democratic.
Yes.
But I appreciate that's not a fun conversation. So
if it's going to happen anywhere, it would be here.
Right. Yeah, true. So that would be the thing that needs to happen. But also, I'm a leader who won the election with 85% of the vote. I think what I say does matter.
Yeah.
And I really want to see those MPs defect.
Well, that's what I was then thinking about when you talked about the internal structures within the party that basically binds your hands, is a sort of negative way of putting it. You would say it's a flourishing of direct democracy within the Green Party of England and Wales. I mean, do you think there's a case for toughening up the powers you as the leader have because you won such a convincing victory, and actually maybe less compromise behind the scenes, more your way?
I'd almost say the opposite, and I'm not arguing here for less powers. The leader of the Green Party has very little kind of formal power. It's all about, do you have a microphone? What are the things you're saying? But actually, I think those things really matter for the exact reason where we partly started this conversation, that I'm not a blank sheet of paper. I have lots of ideas and lots of opinions. But also it means that I don't ever just go off on the things that, I think that day. There's a genuine community feel of me going around the country constantly. I'm constantly travelling to local parties all around England and Wales. I'm listening deeply. I'm out on doorsteps and constantly evolving the message, constantly both fitting in with my values, but also listening to what's being reflected back at me. I think that's a much better way of doing politics. And I don't just mean for the Green Party. I see that as a role model of how I would want us to do politics as we increasingly control administrations or run administrations and increasingly have more MPs in government. It's about making sure we have that connection. And then the other bit I would say with that, which is where we're not where I want to be yet, is with the trade unions. I want to form much deeper links with ultimately not the trade union leaders, but actually the workers, because they're the people I really care about. And I think ultimately if the leaders of trade unions don't represent their workers, then the workers will make different decisions. And I want to make it clear that I'm there to keep having those conversations, both with the workers and with the leaders, because I think the home of the worker is in the Green Party.
But just as we get ready to scrutinise the Green Party conference this weekend in Bournemouth, I mean, should we not be looking out for your classic trademark policy being launched on the platform? Because that's just not how the Green Party works.
That's right. And I actually am not launching a policy. And some of the media rounds this morning, I think, found that quite odd, because traditionally you do launch a new big policy. And I thought about it and we kind of brainstormed some ideas. And then I just thought, I want to go back to basics. What is the Green Party for? The Green Party is the party of environmental, social, racial and economic justice. Everyone knows about the environmental bit. So I want a conference speech and a conference where if journalists just take one message from it, The Green Party care about the cost of living crisis. We care about the fact that we've got to tackle the climate crisis. But to do that, we need to make sure that working class communities are not badly affected. In fact, quite the opposite. In tackling the climate crisis, we need to make sure that we are bettering people's lives, that we're redistributing power and wealth around this country. And I think all of that's quite a complex message. I think it's communicable, and I hope I'm doing it. But I think you don't need to add new shiny things or new policies to that. I think it's going back to basics and saying there is a 1% who control the power and wealth. Let's redistribute that. And that's ultimately what you get when you join the Green Party. I also, secondly, I'm careful about promoting podcasts on other podcasts, but I really am going somewhere substantial. I launched a podcast the day I became leader of the Green Party, Bold Politics with Zack Polanski. It went to number 3 in the country. I'm not competing with Newscast. I wouldn't ever do that. But the important reason why I'm saying this is I've used it as a platform to platform, I would say, lefty voices that you would expect. I had Gary Stevenson on yesterday, although he'd say he's not a lefty voice. Owen Jones on Saturday night. I'm doing a live episode with Grace Blakely. I've got Jolyon Rubinstein coming on, so Zoe Gardner, amazing voices. But actually where I'm really interested in is on day one of my leadership, I went to Clacton because I thought rather than go somewhere where I'm just kind of listening to people who already agree with me, I want to go have some more challenging conversations. And I met a guy there called Paul who'd just come out of prison. He said he was really bothered by migration. He then said, I'm Irish, so it's not that I hate migrants, but just look at my community. His words, not mine, but it's a crap hole. You know, how can you say that we need more people here? And I just said to him, would you have this conversation with me on the podcast? Because I think it's really important as a party, people can hear that we're listening to voices that you wouldn't necessarily expect us to agree with. And we are not just listening, but we're actually evolving as a party to make sure we're reflecting people's concerns. And that's people right across England and Wales. And so that's really what I do want to do with this conference. It's not about policy as much. It's about going, actually, what does this look like in the round? I should caveat all of that with I am proposing a new policy, but I'm going to do a conference for.
Okay.
But it's just to challenge Labour's indefinite leave to remain changes. And I just think it's important as a political party in British politics that people know is unashamedly saying migration is part of what makes this country great. And as much as...
And so would you leave indefinite leave to remain as it is? Because Shabana Mahmood wants to increase the qualifying period and put more factors in there, like your contribution to British society, to decide whether you get the status or not.
I think it's grim and I think it's outrageous. And I think we need to be clear where it's coming from. Donald Trump says something one day. The next day, Reform repeats the same thing. And then a few months later, Keir Starmer starts to panic and starts to legislate for that. We are on a doom spiral with all of this. And actually what we need is politicians to look the public in the eye and say, even though this is difficult for you to hear sometimes, migration is really important for this country. This country was partly built on migration. And actually, when you look at the NHS, we've got 150,000 vacancies. Now, I know someone will say to me, what about British workers? Of course, we need to train British workers. And of course, that's part of the picture. But also what's truthful right now is that if you use the National Health Service, the person who treats you or cares for you is so much more likely to be a migrant than anyone in front of you in the queue. And we never hear these arguments, or very rarely.
Yeah, but not to get pernickety. So you're going to oppose the Labour changes, but would you keep indefinite leave to remain as it is?
For now, but I do think there's a longer conversation about how do we make people feel more welcome in this country. And I recognise someone who is less judicious than you would immediately say to me, but look at the polling, look what people care about. And then I go, the small boats, that's 5% of migration in this country. But I would say it dominates about 95% of the conversation about migration. So for media, keep up the conversation about small boats. And then polling says people are worried about the small boats. It's all one vicious cycle of not hearing from voices that are going, actually, I hear your concerns. And if your concerns are about not enough council homes, can't get a dentist appointment, feeling like the country doesn't really work anymore, I share those concerns and I think they're totally legitimate. But those concerns are decades of Conservative austerity and now Labour austerity that are not going to fix those things. They're not the problems of migrants. And I think comes back to the blank sheet of paper thing. When I think the public are not in the place that I think they need to be on these issues, we need to put the information in there. And I think that's part of the politician's job. I also think, as well as that, it's not about sneering at people or talking down to them, but it is about saying if people have got the right information, that's part one of part two. The second part, though, is sometimes people can have all the information in the world. If there are powerful vested interests that are pumping out dangerous and toxic narratives, then you've got to take on those vested interests. I think the Green Party in the past have done the information bit. They've not done the vested interest bit. I'd like to think of myself as fearless, and I'm ready to take on those vested interests.
Okay, well, from one podcaster to another, thank you very much.
Thanks. Really enjoyed it.